Welcome to another episode of Business Way Outside the Box. Today we have an interesting guest who will talk about business etiquette and business etiquette conversation that leads to conversations of value. Our guest today is also a UMass Amherst grad. She was more useful with her time and actually was on the rowing team. I was the last person to be left off the tennis team. And Janet comes from a career in PR. We forgive her for that, and has morphed or pivoted, as the phrase goes for these times, into social conversations and etiquette consulting. And I'd like to bring Janet on to sort of explain to us the overview of what that means. Welcome, Janet.
Well, thank you, Steve. I'm thrilled to be here. So when people talk about etiquette, they generally think of somebody back in the 1890s with the corsets and the umbrellas and kissing ladies' hands. But etiquette, for me, it boils down to this. Etiquette consists of conduct that makes others feel valued, understood, and heard. It's as simple as that. That takes place at the dinner table. If we know our table manners, we're able to focus on the people in conversation at hand. We limit distractions. It applies to the cubicle. It applies to the networking event. It applies to the stadium bleachers. How do we make others feel important, feel that they matter?
Okay, and so I should plug our event that we will be doing together on this very topic on March 16th at 8:30 to 9:30 in the morning. And you can go to mypinnaclenetwork.com to find a link for that and join that free webinar. And we will expand upon that topic for an hour. But let me go back to you, Janet. So in a business setting, and in particular, a lot of our listeners are interested in how to improve their networking skills so that they can support others in their network as well as be supported by them. What are some of the ways that you can immediately identify some of the misunderstandings about networking and the myths of networking and how to improve that through better business etiquette?
Well, Steve, you mentioned something important, which is that when we network, we're not only looking to improve our own business, but also to boost the business of others. To collaborate, it's all about collaborations. So when people go to a networking event, sometimes they think about, what am I going to say to entice somebody to buy from me? What can I say to rein them in? When actually what we should be thinking is, what can I say to make other people feel valued, understood, and heard? You'll hear me say that a lot because it is so critical to our success. So when we go to a networking meeting, we want to put others at ease. We want to encourage them to talk. We want to take an interest in them. And we will also have our turn at sharing information about ourselves, but make it about the other person.
Okay, yeah, no, I agree. I think networking really works. The catalyst for networking is helping the other person first.
It is.
And part of that helping the other person first is making them feel important, listened to, and whatever their position or mindset is recognized.
Yes, valued, understood, and heard.
Okay, and so what made you leave this esteemed world of PR to go into something that is what you do today?
Well, it was I enjoyed my time in PR, and my background is in sales and public relations, and for 8 years I was in public relations. Steve, every once in a while you say to yourself, it's time for a change. It's time for a new chapter. So I became a consultant, and I did public relations on a consulting basis, and thought to myself, so what am I going to do when I grow up? What am I going to do with the rest of my life? Well, for some reason, I decided to portray women from American history. This was actually based on my grandmother. And so I developed these characters such as Dolly Madison. I researched, develop a script, dress like them, become them. And I noticed that as I added on characters, the etiquette theme seemed to thread through all of them. The idea of showing respect for yourselves and others, making others feel valued, it ran through all of them. At the same time, I started meeting people who had some affiliation with the Protocol School of Washington. I met several people. So, sometimes life offers you these opportunities and then sort of bats you off the head and says, do you hear me? Do you hear me? So I attended the Protocol School of Washington, and here I am today. I've been teaching etiquette for like 15 years, almost 15 years.
Great. And so can you give us an example of sort of an engagement that you've had with a business group and sort of how that went, how it worked?
Oops. Oh, Steve, please repeat.
Oh, sure.
You
No
cut
worries.
out.
So I was saying, could you give us a real life example of how you have worked with a business group in the etiquette, arena?
Yes, I can give you several. Actually, I actually work with different groups of people. Very often people come to me and they say, I go to a networking meeting. I've got someone standing in front of me I've never laid eyes on before. I'm supposed to talk to them. I don't know what to say. Others will come to me because they have so much to say, they can talk all day, but they're not making that connection. They're not building rapport. And that, of course, building rapport, making that connection is critical if we want to succeed and we want others to succeed. So often I'll often speak to whoever's organizing the group. What are the needs of the group? What I can focus on a zillion different things. Where should my area of focus be? And then a session will run it might one session, it might run as many as 5 sessions. And for each session, I'll choose topics that are relevant to the group. We'll do a lot of role play. We'll have some thought-provoking questions, banter back and forth, and then there'll be homework. In the next session, we review the homework. What did you run into? Where were the glitches? What were your triumphs? And then introduce new material. Okay. I remember it was one of my first workshops for a group. I was at an engineering firm, and I presented, I forget what the icebreaker was that I used, but I was breaking the ice, and they're all looking at me as if I have 2 heads. There's nothing going on. And I thought this workshop is going to be about half the time I had allotted if we don't talk. And then all of a sudden, it's like the ice just broke. We had this wonderful conversation. It turned out to be a great workshop. What I learned is that people respond differently. Everybody isn't going to respond to the same icebreakers. Everybody warms up at their different time frames. And so it's partially a study in human personality types and who responds to what.
And so do you find that sort of usually non-sales professionals, engineers, accountants, lawyers are less comfortable with sort of small talk, banter, that initial relationship building, as opposed to marketing and salespeople who tend to be loquacious but might be superficial?
Yes, and these are, of course, you said in general, which of course is absolutely true. In general, if I work with an accountant, if I work with a CPA, if I work with that's an accountant, working with an engineer, they tend to be less comfortable making small talk. And the real estate agents tend to be very comfortable making small talk. So you have the 2 ends of the spectrum. In either case, though, they come to me because whatever they're doing or not doing, they're not making a connection. It's either too little conversation or too much conversation. It isn't geared properly.
Okay. And what about after the initial relationship building moment, either at a networking session or over lunch or at a symposium? How do you continue to build that relationship? Do you have advice on that as well?
You mean after the initial meeting?
Yes.
Or after the initial meeting? We have so many options. Technology has given us so many ways to keep in touch. The first thing that comes to mind is LinkedIn. Friend the person, or connect. Friend is Facebook. Connect with the person on LinkedIn. There might be an article that you come across that might be of interest to that person. Send it to them. So it's a way. There are companies such as Send Out Cards where you can send cards to people on a regular basis. Just it's keeping in touch. You don't want to fall too far below the surface, or you become buried in all the day-to-day minutia of everybody's life.
Yeah, no, agreed. I think there's this constant need to be in connection, and some of that is through a monthly e-newsletter, whether they read it or not, they read the subject line. There's a lot of ways to stay in touch. And it sounds like some of what you teach, or there's an intersection between etiquette and what a lot of people use the buzzword phrase of emotional intelligence.
Yes.
Okay.
There is clearly an intersection. When we practice etiquette, when we make others feel valued, understood, and heard, we put ourselves in their shoes. We don't consider simply our own frame of reference, but what's their frame of reference? And how can we position ourselves as an ally, put one foot onto their turf and take a few steps there?
Okay. And so can you give us a couple examples of how somebody at whether it's a Zoom call or a face-to-face meeting, how do they convey that they're listening and they're giving respect to the other person directly in front of them?
Well, there are several ways to do that, Steve. One way is to take a short phrase, something that someone said, and repeat it. So if someone says, I'm sorry I'm late, there was a 5-mile backup at the bridge. A person might respond, gee, oh, I understand why you're late. But another response could be, a 5-mile backup. When we take something someone said and repeat it, they understand immediately that we've been listening to them, so they feel heard.
Okay. And from a body language standpoint, whether you're on Zoom or in person, what are sort of the positioning that people understand as we're really in this thing together?
Yeah, everybody knows you don't fold your arms. That can be interpreted as setting up a barrier, not always, but it can be. And another tip is to lean forward ever so slightly. So you're slightly leaning into the person. It prevents you from leaning back, which you do not want to do. So leaning in, and think about the times that you've been in conversation with someone, generally at a table, and you find yourself, because they're drawing you in. So we can mimic that when we're standing by just simply and intentionally leaning slightly forward.
One of the more interesting networking stories I've ever heard was a printer said to me, he was at a live networking meeting and he felt someone was too close to him. He violated his personal space and he kept moving back and the guy kept pursuing him. And eventually he said to him, I have to tell you, you're too close. I'm uncomfortable with the body distance. And the guy took a moment and he thought, my friend who's the printer thought this guy would be furious and embarrassed. And he said, something? I really want to thank you for telling me that, because I was not aware of it. And it's a really good thing to know so that I don't sort of take other people hostage as well. So I thank you. And so do you have some stories like that of some really sort of interesting interactions when people are trying to connect, but they either, some of the Seinfeld terms, they long talk, they low talk, they talk too close, those kinds of things.
One story that comes to mind, Steve, is a program I gave at the Carroll School for the Blind. There was a man there who was probably in his mid-50s. He had been an engineer, and of course, he was losing his sight. He said, when I go to networking meetings, he's looking for a job, a new career. He said, I go to networking meetings, and I always cringe because people say to me, so what do you do? And I have to tell them, well, I used to be an engineer. I've lost my sight. I'm looking for a new career. And he said, right off the bat, I just want to sink to the ground. So I asked him, what would you rather someone say? He said, ask me what brings you here.
Yeah.
So from that moment on, of course, I ditched what do you do and replaced it with what brings you here. So that was a question that would make him feel comfortable in a conversation and feel as if he had an ally, somebody who can understand him.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. And the other thing I find in networking sessions and situations, a lot of people don't know how to disengage,
Right.
right? So they become a Klingon, and they just don't know how to move on to the next person. What's your recommendation on how to, know when it makes sense to move on?
Well, when you're ready to move on, it's probably time to move on. Now, one time, and there's a way to end a conversation in a way that makes you memorable. I was talking to a dentist once, and the conversation was ending. I was wrapping up the conversation. I extended my hand, which of course is a sign that you're ending the conversation. So there's the physical sign. And I said to her, I never realized that dentists will download a meditation tape, not only to calm a nervous patient, but to calm themselves. This has been really fascinating. I hope we meet again. So instead of saying, it's been nice meeting you, I hope we meet again, I brought up something that she said, something very specific that she talked about and that clearly would resonate with her. So that's a very simple technique for ending a conversation. Whether the other person is ready to end it or not, it's the same technique. Mention something they said, something that will be meaningful to them, extend your hand and wrap it up.
Right. That was pre-pandemic.
That was pre-pandemic. Yes.
So
yes.
now
would be a nod.
Right now, or extend our elbow or something. Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Pre-pandemic. Yes.
Gotcha.
I forget sometimes.
Right. No, that's okay. Yeah, we're all there. As a matter of fact, I was talking to a doctor who reached out and grabbed my hand, and I'm thinking, what has he been reading for medical literature lately? So, but anyway, and so you've got a diverse background, but what would we not know about you if we did a Google search? What is a sort of an interesting fact about your past life that doesn't show up in any of the traditional places online?
My sordid past, Steve, includes several years of rock climbing.
Huh?
So I scaled the cliffs, the Canadian Rockies, of course, up in the White Mountains. Also the Devil's Tower, it's the inside of a volcano. It was featured in the movie E.T. I climbed up between the pillars. That's something you would not find out about me online.
Well, I guess so. Well, what I wanted to do is two things: plug our event again. So if you want to hear more from Janet, as I do, join us March 16th, 8:30 to 9:30 in the morning. Go to mypinnaclenetwork.com to find the link to RSVP for that complimentary free webinar, and you will learn more. It should be interesting. I'm looking forward to it. And Janet, tell us the best way to reach you to get more information directly about your practice and your services.
Well, the easiest way to reach me would probably be on LinkedIn. So if you type in Janet Parnes, etiquette, you'll be directed to my LinkedIn page. My website is etiquettefortoday.com, which is long. And for is spelled F-O-R. So etiquettefortoday.com. It might be easy to find me on LinkedIn.
Okay. Well, thank you. It was really fun. I could spend more time on this, but I know that everybody's attention span is about somewhere between 15 and 35 minutes. So
exactly.
I look forward to hearing more during the webinar itself. And let me close by saying this has been another episode of Business Way Outside the Box. If you know a business that is interesting or offbeat, please contact me at prworkzone.com and let me know about that person, and we'll see if we can get them on our podcast. Thank you, Janet, again for being on.
Thank you, Steve. My pleasure.
All right.